you hear like the theories, Rome, conspiracy with Rome, conspiracy with King James, and at least you get that.
Right.
I mean, I usually just get, it's written by men.
Written by men.
Invalid.
Written by men.
Argument over.
You know what I mean?
That's written by men. It's either it's written by men, therefore it's completely flawed, or no, it came down, with Abraham. It came down with him then, and then he sent it down again with Christ and the dove. And it's like, wait a minute, they both take two extremes.
Welcome to Acts2and42. Real discussions, real opinions, real stories and testimonies, real church talk. Welcome to Acts2and42.
All right, guys, welcome back to Acts2and42. This is Keith again. And again, I got my wife, Sheree, and we got TJ with us remotely. We're respecting the social distancing, Corona madness.
I don't respect nothing.
I'm all in their face.
I don't respect nothing.
Look, man, side note, dude in Philly got pulled off a train for not having a mask on by police.
Are you serious?
Or bus, excuse me, not train, bus. Same thing,
What you mean, like Philadelphia, France or something?
Man, Philadelphia. Not the Church of Philadelphia. Philadelphia.
Yes. Hey, baby, get the strap.
Yeah. Pulled him off just for not wearing a mask. And he was freaking out,
It's happening.
So, but that's not why we're here today. That's not why we're here, Keith. Stay on subject.
No, that's actually why we're here today.
It's why we're doing it. Right. Yeah. So, nonetheless. But, so what we want to talk about today is the Bible, right? And a lot of people will come, sometimes you'll be talking to someone, they'll just be like, man, well, I don't know, man. After all, it's just written by men. It's just written by men. So really, who really knows if we can trust it or, what's good and what's not? So to be fair, though, this is said by believers and unbelievers. So this is just in an attack or, whatever against, it's not an attack at all, but it's not against presuming only unbelievers say this, because believers say this. And I do want to say that sometimes it's just general doubt. That's all. There's not anything specific. There's not a lot of background information. They don't really know anything about, transmission and translation and whatnot. Mm-hmm. It's just general doubt, right? Other times they've got, I've heard theories, King James commissioned it. He wrote it. He had him write it. Like they fabricated it right there. And then, the theories we dealt with before about Rome, the conspiracy of Rome, or that, Constantine and them just made the Bible they wanted at that time. So there's a lot of theories, and they're just that, theories, because there's really no evidence for it. But Sheree, you kind of proposed this. You asked the question. So what exactly, what's your question centered at? What are you asking a question about? What do you want to deal with?
Well, I mean, that's just it. The assumption that it's just written by men. Well, I guess that's not an assumption. It literally is written by men. And that's it. It's dismissed because it's just written by men. So, it's dismissive. Like who cares about all that or what it says? Mm-hmm. But at least like you saying, you hear like the theories, Rome, conspiracy with Rome, conspiracy with King James. And at least you get that. Right. I mean, I usually just get, it's written by men.
Written by men.
Invalid.
Written by men.
Argument over.
You know what I mean?
That's written by men.
But then I'm just like, what part? The whole thing or a certain part written by men, And usually, if it's Christians, it's parts. Most of the time by Christian, it's just this part.
Right.
Is written by men. Or that part was added in, Coincidentally, it's the part that they don't agree with most of the time. Right. That part was written by men. Rest of it, inspired by God. Right. That part written by men.
To be fair, I've come across stuff that I was like, look, I love God. I believe in his infallibility. I believe in scripture and the authority, but I can't get with that.
Mm-hmm.
I got to understand some things. I got to, I'm not rejecting it. I won't do that. But there's things that make me step back and say, man, I don't know about that, man. So anyway, I just want to say that, No,
you weren't, because just recently, just last night, I had to do that.
You did. I did. We were having a conversation. I was like, well, hold on.
About that.
I was like, hold on. So I read the scriptures and she was like, Man, well, I mean, what's the context though? I'm like, what it say though? Like, what it say? Right. So we all do it. We all do it. Let's just be fair. But anyway, Sheree, continue. I won't put you on blast anymore.
But yeah, so nobody ever has, like, at least for me, when I come in contact with people, they just use it in a dismissive manner to condone whatever it is they're doing or want to do. Or just Christianity as a whole is fake, it's invalid. Old Testament, New Testament, none of it's real. It's just written by men. It's a fairy tale, like the Odyssey or something like that, So that's what I come encounter with, and I just wanted to address that today, clear the air.
Okay, T-Sock, what you got? Clear it up for me. Let them know.
I have nothing at all. Next on the docket. I've dealt with the question, or the statement, excuse me, that, both statement and question, because some people will put it out there as it's definitive, it's written by men, as if that's the end all be all, and others will ask, well, do you know that you do know that it's written by men, right? As if they're insinuating that because it's written by men, that somehow by default insinuates falsehood,
right?
So in both cases, I agree with the general statement that it is written by men.
Mm-hmm.
I think it shows an extreme lack of understanding, lack of information, lack of consideration of the information to state that, to try to oppose the statement as if it's like, no, well, that ain't true, because it is true.
Right.
It was written by men. But my question is, okay, so yes, it is written by men, but what are you insinuating by that?
Mm-hmm.
What are you desiring to relay by the by stating that the scriptures are written by men? And from there, a lot of times you find out they don't even know. They haven't really thought it through, that much.
Don't you feel like saying, I mean, was anyone under the impression that God wrote it?
Yeah.
Like that he wrote it, that he printed it and said, here you go? Like
the golden quill.
Right. I mean, because isn't that
when
what
the
it
dove
implies?
Came down and descended upon Christ, then the book was with it.
Right.
Because it was like the dove and then scripture on the dove's back. And the Lord said, look, this is my son and my scripture.
Right. In which
Both
I'm
of them
well pleased. Right.
So nobody stated that with the dove came the scriptures, and the Lord has esteemed both of these things equally as being from his hand, as being in heaven with him from the beginning. So to state that it's written by men, is it something that's being debated? But the problem is that the context is being stated in. It's literally arguing against an argument that no one's presented. You're speaking against something that isn't there. And by stating it, you somehow gain a victory. Over not just a victory over the Christian who believes in it, but you're using that as the knockout punch that allows you to just walk off like, hey,
right.
It's written by men, therefore we have nothing to talk about.
Right.
As if the Christian is saying that it wasn't written by men, and nobody's saying that.
Right.
Which is why I believe it's important to figure out exactly what they mean by what they're saying.
Right.
That should be the first endeavor, to figure out what we follow, Jordan Peterson, and one of the things he advises is to define words. Define words and phrases, understand. Ask someone, what do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
You say this. Don't assume what they mean, because as we found out, many times before, someone will say something and I'll hear one thing, but what they're saying in retrospect is something totally different. So let me ask, well, what do you mean by that? I think I understand, but what do you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
And then have them articulate, and then we can actually hone in on exactly where the issue is.
Yeah.
Without allowing them to say it and escape, or it becomes just, well, no, it wasn't, because yeah, it was. And if you argue against, if you argue against it being written by men, I don't think that you understand the transmission of Scripture. Because it was penned by men, inspired by God, but inspiration is in penmanship. And penmanship is not inspiration. It can be both.
So explain inspiration. Like clarify inspiration.
Inspiration is it being I don't want to say breathed by God, but I guess the best word to use that would actually give the audience a proper understanding is almost intuition. It's something past oneself that leads you almost like the gut feeling, but of a divine nature that essentially tells you what to pen. That thing it's the ghostwriter, which tells you what to write, which leads you in the proper direction. It leads you through the field, through the proper path, that you're writing exactly what is true and what that thing has desired for you to pen. It's not just someone of their own accord picking up a pen and saying, you know what, I want to write something today.
Right. And because I think the reason why I asked that is, the word inspiration to us today is very different than when it was written, in was it 2 Timothy 3:16, for all scriptures given by inspiration of God. If someone used inspiration in a sentence today, in reference to anything else, it would mean something altogether different.
Something they felt like doing.
Right.
I was inspired to do this. I had a sudden feeling come over me to do this.
Right.
I wanted to do this. Out of nowhere, I thought, let me do this.
Yep.
That's the inspiration of today.
Right.
Right.
So, we've already kind of thrown around whether or not it's a believer saying this. And if it is, if you're a believer, then that would, that would lead to 2 Timothy 3:16, then you should be believing what the apostles and their Lord taught, which is that all scripture was given by inspiration. It was the source, or the way it was, came to us, was through the process of inspiration. And, it is properly, I think the word is theopneustos, which is, I don't speak Greek, but that's my poor pronunciation of it, which is God breathed, or, neustos is the word for spirit or wind, which is where we get inspiration, the root word of spirit is in there, so the source, the spirit that sourced it, the spirit that inspired it is God, not you, not your spirit, not man's will, not man's spirit, and that these holy men, as Peter said, were moved as the Spirit told them, So
they were essentially muses.
Muses is a good spiritual term to use. And a carnal one would be transcriber, like a scribe or someone that's transcribing what another person is telling them, which I think Paul and other people may have had someone write, there's theories about that, but anyway, so that's just when you have someone write down for you. You're not writing it, but you're saying it,
Yeah.
So it doesn't take away authenticity at all, so nonetheless, but that's what a believer should believe. And there's a difference, it's very important when you come across, the word inspiration and other biblical words, that you understand what that word meant when the man wrote it. It doesn't mean what you think it means today. We've talked about the word passion. Passion is not love and desire and emotion and swept away by their passions. No, it means to suffer. It implies suffering, which suffering implies tolerance and allowing and patience and like long suffering, to tolerate something, to bear with it, to endure. You know what I mean? So this is what these words mean. Love causes you to do those things, right? If you love, your love towards someone causes you to tolerate, to bear with them, to hold on, whatever. But I might be butchering someone's language, but nonetheless, the words are very different. We read them from an English speaking perspective and background, or Spanish or Italian or whatever it may be, we're probably going to be far away from what the author's intent was. So inspiration is a good one to define before you run with your view of the scriptures, you know. So anyway, but that doesn't do it for the non-believer, though. Like, so to the non-believer, it says it was just written by men, right? To a Christian, that should be like, well, hold on, bro, I thought these were inspired, you know?
Yeah.
Otherwise, who's your teacher? Who's your apostle? What's your faith? You know, because this is what our teachers, our apostle, and our faith taught. But to a non-believer, right? That's like saying, to a non-believer, saying, well, the Bible said it. That don't work. I don't know if you ever done it. Try it. It doesn't work because they don't accept the Bible. So what do we say? Or, you know, even Sheree, I don't know if you have anything, but what would you say to someone who's just a professed non-believer and it was just written by men? Or T, you're welcome to jump in, you know.
I don't know what I would say to a non-believer.
Okay.
I don't. I think for me, there's a challenge trying to convince someone of something they don't believe in anyway, that it's real, you know. I can't convince someone there's a ghost in the corner if they don't even see the ghost. Like, they don't believe in ghosts at all. Right. Like, you know, so, but so that's just me.
I'm sorry. I was going to ask, is that an appropriate time to ask them, is there a fault with the scriptures? Or do you think there's a fault with the scriptures because of your belief? Like the ghost analogy.
Right.
Like, all right, well, is it because there's not a ghost in that corner? Or are you saying it's not because you don't believe in ghosts?
Yeah.
So what if you don't believe in ghosts, but they exist anyway?
Yeah.
Could there be one in that corner? If they exist anyway? Right.
As far as the unbeliever is concerned, the person who already does not believe, I think if you're trying to point to scripture, it will be an impossible endeavor. You know, we talked about it before in the last podcast. It's that point where you're too far apart to reach a common ground. But that's why.
So what do you point to?
You point to secular things. You know, I don't point to the scriptures to convince a non-believer. I point to things that I think if God said it, if it's something that, if God is the creator of the universe and God has said something is good or bad, we should find ample evidence of that thing being good or bad outside of scripture. I should never have to just say, well, the scripture says X, Y, and Z. You know what I'm saying? I should be able to show outside of what the scripture says, that this thing is bad or good because of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
You know, I don't have to say, well, God instituted a marriage between a man and a woman. I can show you how the institution of marriage between a man and a woman is significantly better than the institution of marriage between man and man, woman and woman, or just being single parents, period.
Right.
You know, so there should be a reference point outside of scripture. And I think that Paul made it clear that the invisible things of God are seen and manifested through what can be seen for a reason. So he didn't say that the greatest things of God, all the things of God are explained and manifested through scripture. You know, it's the invisible things that are manifested through things that we can see. So you should be able to point to things that we can see and show God, you know, without having to go to scripture. Right. So for those who are already unbelievers in scripture, the Lord has left he has left something secondary, something else we can point to for them as well. You know, as they see, look, here's why we believe X, Y, and Z is either right, wrong, or, you know, whatever it is. Because we see this, we see that. You know, talk to them psychologically. There are many things which the scripture says is wrong. You see negative psychological impact if you do them. You know, many things the scripture says is right. You see positive psychological impact if you do them. You know, you see negative and positive societal impact. You know, so when it comes down to people who don't believe, I have both with people who don't believe and who do believe. I try not to just go to the scripture first. You know, let me deal with other things first.
Mm-hmm.
Let me deal with the secular nature first. And then I can bring you to the scripture.
Right.
You know, after I've shown you secularly how these things are either good, you know, or negative for the environment, for, you know, for the culture, for the community.
Mm-hmm. Or people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
So we dealt with it on
it's
the theism thing. You know, like there's
Yeah.
you can't just bring people to Christ that don't believe in a God.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If people don't believe in the Bible, you can't just be like, bam, the Bible, Jesus, you know. You kind of have to start in the secular, you know, arena. And because I think there's some serious questions or ramifications to the idea that, you know, the Bible's invalid, that it's not true. If it's not true, then you're actually attacking a lot of other extracurricular ideas that I don't know if you're ready to tackle. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy just to cast doubt, but when you do that, so are we saying there's no God? Are you saying man doesn't know God, that God doesn't interact with man? Are you you know what I mean? So you have to deal
Are
with.
you saying that Christ didn't exist?
Yeah,
and there's a whole lot in there.
That was one of my next questions was, and this is something to consider. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you say the Bible's just written by man, or you have doubts and just say throw it out, then are you proposing, or do you realize the fact that you could be proposing the idea that Jesus did not exist and that he did not die and was not raised from the dead, right? And I don't think that most of us are able to dive into that. You know what I mean? Most subjects we're not. We have to yield to different experts that, you know, that's all they do. But you know what I mean? Because if this man died and rose from the dead, that's a game changer. Doesn't matter whose faith it is. I don't care who did it. If a man dies and comes back from the grave after 3 days and then ascends into heaven at the account of eyewitnesses given, mostly biblical, but there's extra biblical. Probably didn't know that. You know what I mean? Many people that have these doubts don't know that there's extra biblical witnesses to the life and the death of Jesus Christ. So the man is historical. Whether or not you believe he's God is a different subject. Whether or not he rose from the dead, different subject. But if he did rise from the dead and he spoke and affirmed the law of Moses and the God of Moses and all these things in the prophets, and then he, you know, established a new covenant, you might want to get in that. You know, you might want to check that out. So, but am I wrong that these things are attached? These ideas are attached. And so it begs other questions, you know?
Yeah.
Because whether or not you trust it, and I think it maybe boils down to some people it's trust. Shrey, I think you touched on it. Some people it's you don't like what it says.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, is it because you don't believe in ghosts that you think the ghost's not in the corner? Is it because you like that? You know?
I mean, there's a lot not a lot, excuse me. There are some things that we all have read that initially it's like, man, I don't know about that. And it's like, yeah, I know exactly what it's saying right now. And I know what that means, but I don't like that. You know, because we think that it could be better without that. You know, not saying that the Lord is wrong, but it's like, well, I don't know, man. Is it that serious? You know, whether it's makeup or even like with myself being a single man, it's like, well, if I'm actually trying to get towards marriage, well, then is this really wrong? But the Lord said it's wrong. You know, so there are parts that are contentious for us.
Slavery.
Yeah.
Because God is for the transatlantic slave system. See what I mean? You know,
I can't agree with that, but yeah.
Right, I know. But again, worldviews. Worldviews, things you like, you don't like. You look at the scriptures, see the word slave. You're like, see? That what? Okay. Apples and oranges. It's not a fair comparison at all. But again, you're not. I think that you have to be honest with yourself, and again to the listener, because some people hate watch. You know what I mean? So if people don't just watch videos because they agree with the topic, they want to hear and poke holes in the things people say they disagree with, and so I always not acquiesce, but accommodate. I always accommodate for the non-believer, for the arguer, for the disagreeer. You know, when dealing with this, because I want to speak to them as well. But to them, like, I don't care. We don't care. It has nothing to do with us. You're free to view the scriptures, whether believer or non-believer. You're free to treat the scriptures how you want. If you offend anyone, it would be God, and that has nothing to do with me. Period. But you have to ask yourself the question. I think if it were me, I'd ask myself the question: do I know anything about this? Like, seriously. And I'm not trying to call anyone dumb. I'm not trying to disrespect. But what do you know about transmission and translation? What do you know about the manuscripts? And because that's another part. What do you know about the death and resurrection of Christ? What do you know about what can be proven or what has been proven? What do you know about I don't even know what it is, 60 authors within the first 200-300 years that we have all the records of all the writings, from Christ. But the textual evidence, right? It was the Hebraicist from, I think I had it here somewhere on Is Genesis History. They had a Hebraicist talking about, a day means a 24-hour period in Genesis. That's what he's referring. He's referring to night and one day, basically. But the Hebraicist, Steve Boyd is his name. He was talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls being found, right? Caves in Qumran, outside of Israel, around the Jordan or whatever, and they found them well preserved in basically vases, like jars and jars. I'm talking about, I think it's like thousands of jars that have scrolls and pieces of paper. Yeah, and a lot of them are fragments, but they've been well preserved. And with the dating system that they do, some of them are dated as far back as 300 years before Jesus Christ. That's 2,300 years ago. So now we have texts that we know of from our era that we've had for a long time that are from 1000 AD, right, or 1200 AD, and they're virtually identical. And so the Hebraicist is like, look, when you talk about the purity and the accuracy of text, it's unparalleled. 1,200 years apart, at least 1,000 years apart, roughly, for a text to be the same. That for a fact, the one I have from 1000 AD, let's just say that, from 1,000 years later, for a fact it wasn't copied from this piece of paper, right? How the heck did that happen? You understand what I'm saying? Don't make the assumption that the Dead Sea Scroll copy was the source that this guy was copying from, because it did not happen. It could not have happened. They're way too far apart, so, and this one was buried in a cave somewhere and no one had access to it. It was found. So that's not it, but it says the same exact thing, so, and that's something that you really have to dive into cautiously, but it's a labor of love, but it's a labor. It's intensive to look at the manuscript evidence, to look at the copies of what we have. But you're going to hear even the greatest critics compare it to other books of literature, and it's bar none. There's nothing like it from how numerous it is, from the age groups that it spans from, and the accuracy of it. The accuracy overshadows, eclipses, whatever. The Odyssey, Plato. Shrey, you falling asleep?
No.
Okay, you look like she was like...
Sorry,
I have that effect on people. I start talking about textual criticism and manuscript evidence, and people go to sleep.
I'm in here for it.
Right. He's like, right. Tell him about Constantine Simonides. Tell him about that one. Yeah. So, but who knows that? You don't know that. If you're saying, it's just a book written by men, it's a superior book. Even if you take God out, it is a vastly superior book. Historically and as literary work. But and then I think we mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned on air or off air, but archaeology, and people swear there's no evidence for things in the Bible, and little by little, piece by piece, more and more, now it rarely hits mainstream. It's crazy when they find something that challenges the Bible. It's mainstream, New York Times and wherever, right? So anyway, but there's a not a wealth of knowledge. There is a myriad and volumes and volumes of data, of things, of history, of facts to consider that the experts that study all different types of stuff look at. And when they look at the Bible, they shake their head at, Now, are there some issues with it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I am not one that believes in inerrancy, that it has no flaws or no issues whatsoever. That's ridiculous.
But I think that's a disconnect right there, though, because most people who take up this argument, it's either it's written by men, therefore it is completely fallible,
right?
It's completely flawed,
or completely
or
infallible.
It's inspired by God, therefore it's inerrant,
right?
And there's no fallibility with it. It's like, wait a minute,
yeah, now. Too extreme.
Just the fact that we have versions, shows fallibility. It shows that there are differences, and differences.
Part of where we can trust
are worthy of question,
right? Yes,
if there are differences in scripts. That's worthy of question, But there's no one saying, you know what? Yes, there are differences. Yes, but let's take this walk,
right?
Let's go through them. Let's see why they're different. Let's see, who wrote what or whatever. It's either it's written by men, therefore it's completely flawed, or no, it came down, with the Lord when he spoke a lot, with Abraham. It came down with him then, and then he sent it down again with Christ and the dove. And it's like, wait a minute, they both take two extremes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
So I think what you're proposing or what you've done, who you are as an individual, is what is missing. And that's someone who's willing to say, yes, it was written by men, and yes, there are variations. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are things that we find. And it's like, well, no, that's not right. Mm-hmm. We find things that we say, no, that's not right.
Right.
That's not a proper translation. That's not a proper transmission. That was wrong. And we can show you why.
Right.
But
very few places.
What's missing in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Very few.
But there are places.
Right.
So we don't act like, well, there are no places. Because the easy ones like Easter, where's that at?
Yeah, that's easy.
Well, it shouldn't be there.
Right.
It shouldn't be there. And we can say that. No, that shouldn't be there. It should be Passover.
It's funny. We're recording this on Easter.
Yeah.
It's funny we're getting
I didn't think about that.
Right. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. And it should be, because that's the word that was used in Greek. So why would you ever, except for Christian interpolation, as most errors are, the person who's doing the translating or the transcribing says, oh, well, we call it this. So it's the same thing. We call it Easter. We don't call it Passover, because that had already been, commissioned and established at that point in time. So that's where the variation exists, but it should be changed back to an actual translation of the word. The word Easter never meant Passover. The word Passover is a word which means to pass over. The in Egypt, the death angel, the destroyer that passed over the firstborn of Israel when they saw the blood. That word means Passover. It's Paschal. Like, that's all it means. So you could call anything relative to that, but not Easter. That word doesn't connect at all, except if you connect the festival somehow. You know what I mean? Which I think, like the Christian interpolation is that's where it comes from. So you're right. Yeah. But we can deal with those. But again, most people saying that haven't even gotten that far in.
Yeah.
They really haven't gotten that far in to even have a valid case. And that's unfortunate. So I don't know, at that point, I mean, you're kind of showing your cards. You don't want to believe in ghosts, to go back to Shrey's metaphor.
And that's both for, like we stated with the, a lot goes back to the Atheist and Theist podcast, but as we stated there, is what is your reference point? What is evidence? Because both the person who's saying it's written by men hasn't gotten to that point, but then the person who's trying to defend the scriptures, they haven't gotten to that point either.
Yep.
So it's like the onlooker looks and is like, well, we've got nowhere here. Y'all said a whole lot of words, but nothing's been established.
Yep.
And if I ask, we've been there too, where we see two different sides of an argument. So you inbox someone and say, well, hold on now, I heard this. Can you help me understand that? And they have nothing for you.
Yep.
So it's like, all right, well, we've both gotten into an arena that neither one of us were built, to actually sustain ourselves in.
Yeah, and that's another very valid point. And it's not just with the Bible. We've heard it on many different subjects, but to the Christian, this is a reason why you ought to be knowledgeable, because you can't win your brother to trust the Bible, to follow the Bible, and you can't you can't win your neighbor, the stranger, the unbeliever, to trust in God, to believe in Jesus or the Bible. without proper knowledge. Because the problem is, now we try to throw anything we have at it, right? And look, there could be world-renowned experts that come across this video and say you and I are not packaging this information properly. We're saying things that's untrue. Cool, let me know that. So, but we can hear it to people, that we hear, like, man, that was. Why are you saying that? Don't say that, and you're pushing people away, because of bad information, and just a bad, I don't want to say argument, but a bad position. You have a bad position. You don't have good information. You're not reaching them. All you're doing is saying, I think you're wrong, but I don't have good reason to try to show you. So this is a reason why, especially if we think we are called, to be a witness for Christ, this is a reason why you might want to consider information like this. Ask yourself these tough questions. Look at the scriptures, look at the history of it. Check out a podcast once in a while, because I joke, like I said, with Sheree putting her to sleep. She's rubbing her eyes right now and,
Something in my eye.
But it's a hobby to us,
Yeah.
But I understand there's things people would rather do, than.
Yeah, I think it depends on the it goes back to our last podcast, and one of the things mentioned was the desire. The desire of a Christian is to understand their Lord, is to understand what the prophets spoke of, what the apostles spoke of, the things that were written. If they're written aforetime, they're written for our learning.
Right.
Then what should we learn from this? But I'm not eager or willing to jump out and say if that desire is not in them, then they're not Christian, because I don't understand where I was at when I first came on. When I first got saved, I don't know where I was at.
Mm-hmm.
I know I was zealous, but that's all I know. I haven't had a chance to actually consider my own self and look at me and say, you know what? No, you didn't actually love the scriptures. You actually loved your pastor.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And because you're focused on him instead of the scripture, you never take that venture to consider what the scripture is saying, and if there's alternative information that could validate or contradict the scripture is saying. So we end up in this perpetual loop where my pastor said it, therefore it's biblical. It's biblical because my pastor said it. So when someone says, well, wait a minute, but the scripture is written by men, it's either you consider that and then your whole worldview is thrown off, or you reject it because,
my pastor said it.
Exactly. And I think that's where we were. I think that's where I was in the beginning. And it wasn't that my pastor said it necessarily. It's that the things I was reading and the understanding I came to, my pastor confirmed it. Therefore, my pastor confirmed it. So if my pastor says it, it must be true because I've read these things and I came to the conclusion. And now my pastor's saying it, and it becomes this, again, perpetual loop. And you get complacent to where now you're listening to what your pastor says because he has a track record of confirming the things you've already seen. So now instead of studying, you're listening to him for all things, or her, whoever.
The last thing I'll say is all of this, written by man or not, validity or not, what do you do about the personal experiences? What do you do with miracles? I mean, divine, not things we call in the world miracles, like, oh, it's a miracle, things that we've experienced, things you pray for and they happen, things that you pray for and they happen, things you pray for and they happen, not because he's a genie, but because he's God. And so when there's a group of people that, for all intents and purposes, miracles happen in their lives, what do you do with that? How can you denounce that? Like the life existence of a thing happening with no explanation, just random chance. And how come it didn't happen to you? How come it didn't happen to this person? How come it happens to this group of people? Just things to consider. And there's like I said, there's a pile of stuff, whatever you want to call it. There's a bunch of stuff that stands opposed to you, whether believer or unbeliever, that stands opposed to you when you're like, just written by men. I don't really know about this thing. There's a pile of stuff that I would venture to say most of us are not equipped or ready or even interested to deal with. But just know that it stands opposed to that point of view. and there's nothing you can do to climb over that mountain but deal with it. You know.
Yep.
So anyway, you guys have anything else before we wrap up?
Nope.
No, I'm good.
Cool.
I want to see the responses and questions. I'm interested in those. Like, I actually want a good dialogue. Because maybe someone has some information we haven't considered. So I'd like to see the conversation, or maybe someone has questions, you know, and I prefer those.
Right.
Someone that has questions, they're like, well, what about this? We can deal with that all day long.
Yeah. I don't mind, I don't mind questions, questioning. I don't mind issues. I'll be honest, when it just comes to the Bible, when it comes to like God-given scripture and that idea, I can deal with the idea better than I can trying to make claims or validate, say, a book of the Bible or specific translation or that stuff. I will admit that's crazy terrain that very few men can travel through. Right. Old Testament, we were talking about this earlier. Old Testament, the further you go back, the less people you have willing to be presenters and teachers of textual criticism and manuscript evidence, because it gets stickier and stickier and stickier, which is the same with any other book. It's the same with anything, history, period.
So the only problem is that we're actually told that our book started with oral transmission.
Yeah.
We're not told that it started with being written. You know what I'm saying? That's the only difference. We're not told that it started with men writing the transmission. We were told that it started with oral transmission.
Yep.
That was the gate. That was the beginning of it. Right. Unless you consider Enoch, who was told to write it on tablets of stone and then tablets of another tablet, excuse me. In case there was fire or water. Yeah. But outside of that, there's oral transmission. We're told that. So you're not expecting for there to be some type of scroll, which was the first one.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool.
But again, if you don't know that, then you don't know to present that. You don't know.
It's just another thing that is not even being weighed in, not considered. And again, we're, a lot of times not interested. It's just doubt. It's just, I don't want to receive it just by men. That's cool. But the giant, there's opposition. There's a giant standing in the room ready for you that you're just pretending like he's not there. They're ready to knock you on your butt. And it's just not something just because you're not aware, it doesn't mean it ain't gonna happen. Doesn't mean it's not true. So it's just caution. Definitely, I'm not beyond reproach in all subjects or anything like that. So, but nonetheless, man, just an overview. And if anyone's got anything to add, take away, whatever you want to do, drop it in the comments. Let us know. And another thing I'm interested in, anyone got any experts? I wouldn't mind having an expert opinion in one regard or another. So drop a comment or whatever if you have any recommendations, and I would love to talk to them. So other than that, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and Acts2and42.com for more.